Welcome. The main question today is on hunting and how much equipment hunters would take with them in the 18th century. Thanks for joining us today on Questions and Answers with James Townsend and Son. The very first thing I want to do is thank you for your amazing contributions and interactions with us both on last week's live Q&A and that question I put out a couple of days ago about designs for shirts. We are still reading those comments and laughing. I'm not sure how some of them would ever get onto a t-shirt, but there's some really funny stuff there and some really good ideas. Thank you for that. The main question, no, not the main question. The first question is, this one's on the roast beef roast beef, 1794. It says, is the cider used in the recipe regular apple cider, American apple cider, or hard cider, like you have in Europe? Interesting question. And for this particular recipe, either one will work fine. You can use a hard cider or the regular sweet American cider. Here's a question. It's an interesting one. He says, do you have an old recipe for lobster? I hear people back then thought feeding a prisoner a lobster was the equivalent of feeding them a rat. I also heard lobsters were so plentiful that you could pick them off the beach and that Native Americans would eat them and taught others how. I'm not a super expert on lobster, but as we go digging back in the recipe books from the 18th century, especially English cookbooks, you'll find lobster in more than one occasion. Some of them were fairly nice dishes, so I don't believe that lobster, at least in all contexts, was considered a super low-class food like you might consider a rat. Although there is, and I don't know if I've actually seen the documentation for it, but I hear there's documentation for certainly that enslaved people in North America were fed lobsters as a very, very inexpensive kind of food. In fact, they apparently complained that they were being fed lobster too often. So that in certain circumstances, lobster was a very inexpensive meat and fed to working people. Whether that was because they were overly abundant here in North America, that I'm not sure of. Whether that was, a world-round situation where lobsters were just very, very abundant, or whether that was specifically in North America. But they certainly weren't just for very, very inexpensive meals. They showed up in these English cookbooks as roast lobster, roasted on a spit. They'll show up in soups. They potted lobsters, like we did the potted meat episode a couple of weeks ago. They potted lobsters to preserve them for later on. So they were used in a lot of different situations. So this is a question from a mincemeat pie episode we did several years ago. Was this dish meant for the more wealthy families at the time? Both cinnamon and candied orange peel seem like ingredients that would be very common for general household use at the time. Correct me if I'm wrong. So they want to know, was a mincemeat pie an expensive thing, especially with these kind of ingredients? And I would probably say yes. The candied orange peel, the cinnamon, the kinds of meats that you would use in a mincemeat pie if it has meat in it. It's going to be a celebratory dish probably, and for at least for common families, and actually a very particular time of year too for a mincemeat pie. So yeah, I would say you could probably gauge that as a fairly high-class food. There may have been sort of lower, less inexpensive alternatives or substitutes, but those you kind of have to come up with out of your head because they don't necessarily show up in the cookbooks. Stay tuned. I'm not sure how far into the future, but sometime in the future we have another mincemeat pie episode coming up, so stay tuned for that. Here's an interesting question. This one came in on the t-shirt episode. He said, I have a question. Do you ship to countries in Europe, such as Latvia? And the answer is yes. We ship actually all around the world, almost every day, and very quite often to countries in Europe. Maybe not necessarily to Latvia that often, but we can ship to all these countries in Europe, and that service is available on the website. Here's a quick question that came in on the portable soup episode, and this is a question that comes up a lot on the portable soup one, and it has to do with the shelf life. He says, what's the shelf life of this recipe? And portable soup was kind of a food preservation technique that was used in the 18th century, and generally this kind of condensed food is going to stay good for basically as long as you can keep it dry and cool. So it could last many years without any issue at all. And Kevin said he just saw a reference to some particular museum that had some. They reconstituted it after 150 years, and apparently they're still alive after eating it. Here's a good question. This is in on the breakfast one where we had the bacon and the poached egg. He says, so is this your home that you live in? Because I would like to live in a home like that. Well, I'm not so sure you would if you were in that kitchen all the time. That kitchen is just a kitchen set. It's based on the kitchen of the German house at Frontier Culture Museum in Stanton, Virginia. Sorry, I said that wrong. And it's a really interesting kitchen, but it is smoky, like a lot of different 18th century kitchens. And it's not my house. It's actually an outbuilding that's close to the house. Here's a question that came in on the waffle episode that we just did. Those waffles were good. Would you know where you could purchase one of these waffle irons that they use on the show? Thank you so much for your great videos. We are working on an 18th century version of a waffle iron like this. It looks like a fun product to develop, and we have a lot of fun coming up with 18th century products like this and figuring out how to manufacture them. We're going to be working on that. That's going to be several months, but undoubtedly, if you're looking for a modern version, you can look for a Pizzelli? A Pizzelli iron. If you're interested, it sounds like it's making almost exactly the same kind of product. So if you want a modern version, look for a Pizzelli iron. Here are a couple of kind of related questions having to do with hunting. This particular one is a comment from the Pound of Meat episode. And this one's about soldiers and their lack of food. And the person comments, you realize they had the ability to hunt, right? Did they have to worry about hunting season back then? That's a tricky question and comment. While the people in the 18th century obviously had the ability to hunt, the soldiers may have not necessarily had permission to hunt, go out there and use their weapons in that kind of a way. And many times the soldiers were in a situation where there was not game to be had locally. Like forts in the 18th century, they clear cut all their wood for as far as the eye can see around the hunt, or around the fort. There was no cover for game to be close by, and even in other situations where soldiers were on the march, they wouldn't have the ability to just step out of their camp and go hunting. That was too dangerous for them to be able to do. So they weren't able to do that, and they did have to just rely on the kinds of supplies that they were given by the Army. And here is a great question that came in on the last Q&A video. How much hardware would be carried on a hunt? So in a situation where somebody's hunting in the 18th century, how much equipment did they take with them? And not very much. I mean, they had many situations, or some situations, where people went on long hunts for days at a time or weeks at a time, and especially in the fall. And today we would think, okay, we're going on a 2-week trip, and we're going hunting. We're going to take a lot of gear with us. We're going to be camping. They would take a lot less gear than we would think even possible. All this stuff is carried either on themselves or on a single pack animal. They didn't probably even take tents or anything like that with them, and very, very meager food rations that they had with them. So how much gear would they take? Not very much at all. It would probably be very interesting to step back in time and really see just how simply these men lived on these deep frontier situations that this person's talking about. So Kevin and I have been working on and are going to be working on some more content for the Getting Started series. We have some interviews we want to put into that series. And if you're interested in living history and what we do here with living history and the kind of people that are are connected with it and how they do their research. It's a great series. You can sign up for it. It's free. I'll put a link down in the description section. It's a series of emails with written content, and then there's a matching or a paired up video sort of podcast that goes with it. And we're going to be adding some new content to that. So if you've already signed up for that, watch out for some of this new content that you'll be getting in your inbox. And if you are interested, go and sign up for it now. It's a great course, and it's free, and it's a lot of fun. Thank you so much for your amazing input, especially with that last t-shirt question that I had for you, and also for just the amazing comments that come in on all the videos. You're all very kind and very supportive to what we do. I could not make these videos without the kind of support that I get in the comment section. So I really want to thank you for doing that, for sharing what we do on other social media things. That helps so much. Spread the word about what we're doing and the kind of message we have. Thank you so much for all your help, and thanks for watching.